Hello racing fans, horse racing is back along with a brand new horse racing show dedicated to the best horse races in the world, and that is the Group 1s. This is the big Group 1 racing show, and I'm Jacob Bevis, your host, and I'm so looking forward to hosting this show over the new 2016/17 racing season. It is going to basically feature every single Australian Group 1 race, and there's some beauties out there, I can tell you that. There are some that I really love, so I'm looking forward to previewing and expressing my passion for those races on this show. Now today is a massive episode to kick things off, because I'm going to be looking towards the first Group 1 of the new racing season, and that is the Memsie Stakes. And what is so good about this race is that it is a segue into the Spring Racing Carnival. It basically notifies me that the Spring Racing Carnival is just around the corner, and then before we know it, we get into those big Spring Racing Carnival races such as the Caulfield Guineas, the 1000 Guineas, of course the Caulfield Cup, the Cox Plate, the Derby, the Melbourne Cup, the Crown Oaks, the Stakes. There's so many more as well that I just cannot name, because there is just so many of them. And of course there's some great races coming up in Sydney as well over the next few weeks. But I'm looking forward to previewing the Memsie Stakes, so let's get straight in to looking at the first Group 1 of the new racing season. Okay, so let's get straight into looking at the full field with odds for the Memsie Stakes. Of course, the Memsie Stakes will be ridden and rode on Saturday the 27th of August 2016 at 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Time at Caulfield. Of course, you can catch the race on racing.com and 7/2, of course, two free-to-air channels. It's such an amazing thing that you can watch most of the Group 1s on free-to-air these days. Of course, Sky Racing 1 will also have the race. So we start with the favourite, Blackheart Bart, at $2.70. He is the most deserved favourite, of course. Mahuta is at $7. At $7.50 we have Palantino. Lord of the Sky is at $11. Our Fiend Eagle is at $14. Tarzino is at $15. We then have Sophia Rose at $21. Rising Romance is at $21. Also, you then have Charmed Harmony at $23. Hiyoshi at $26. Tavago at $34. Tally at $41. Prince of Penzance at $51. And then Tabish at $126. Okay, so before I get into looking at the field in depth, I just want to point out a couple of things about the Memsie Stakes. The first thing is that 3 out of the last 4 Melbourne Cup winners have resumed in the Memsie Stakes and then went on to win the Melbourne Cup in the same year. So 3 examples of this, you had Prince of Penzance in 2015, basically ride in the Memsie Stakes in 2015 before going on and winning the Cup. Ferrente did the same thing in 2013, and in 2012 Green Moon did the same also. So it is very popular in recent years with creating a Melbourne Cup winner. I guess that's fair to say. Now also this race actually features 4 horses trained by Darren Weir. So Darren Weir actually has 4 legit chances that can win the race in the Memsie Stakes in 2016. Okay, let's get into having a look at the field in depth, and I start with Prince of Penzance at number 1. Of course, the Melbourne Cup winner of 2015 has only had 1 run in between that Melbourne Cup win and going into the Memsie Stakes. So its last run was actually in May this year. It was over 1,600 metres in the Raleigh at Morfordville. It did well. It came second. But the thing I am a bit concerned about is that this is actually going to be a race this is actually going to be the shortest of the distances it's actually ran over its last 5 or so meetings, and it seems to be going from a 2,000 to 3,200 metre horse back down to the shorter distances, and I'm not sure how it's going to cope with that. It's backed at $51, so the punters aren't giving it much of a chance. It's not ridden by Michelle Payne. It's actually going to be ridden by Harry Croffrey, and yeah, it does have the winning range, but I'm a bit uncertain of whether it can actually ride this 1,400 metres correctly, considering that it's been running over longer distances over the last of its 4 races or so. Number 2, it's the favourite, Black Heart Bart, at $2.70. He's the favourite for a reason, because he has placed in his last 5 races. I was lucky enough to see him earlier in the year come second in the Newmarket. Of course, the quarterback won that race earlier in the year. He's had 11 weeks off, but he is very good over this distance. He is probably one of those horses to beat, in my opinion, and yeah, he's just going to be hard to beat. He came second in his last race at Eagle Farm in the Stradbroke. He normally does well at Caulfield. In fact, the last race at Caulfield he ran in the Vic Handicap, he came first, so he's the one to beat for sure in the Memsie Stakes this year. Number 3, we have Lord of the Sky, backed at $11, which is not bad for a horse that has been in okay form. He actually ran in the Lawrence last week at Caulfield. He was leading for most of the race until the last 100 metres, when about 4 horses swamped right past him. So he was one of those horses that went and took the lead for the early part of the race, and then once it got to the back end, horses started to really take the front and go past him. So it's going to be interesting to see if that happens again this week. But he's a fantastic horse. He's done well in his last 4 races. He did come 5th in the Lawrence, by the way, in the end. Came first in the Bletchley, which was at Caulfield. He was ridden by Damien Oliver that day. Hasn't won over this distance though, so that is going to be a bit of an issue, but he did do okay in the Lawrence, I thought. He was, yeah, he just dropped back in the last 100 metres, which obviously wasn't acceptable from a trainer's point of view, but at the same time, he can run a good race. So he's an interesting horse, definitely one to watch in my opinion. Number 4, we have Charmed Harmony, backed by the punters at $23. He's coming off a 4-week fresh up. And in my opinion, the last 4 races coming into this race, he really has been in poor form. He hasn't quite been at the expectation of what we probably would expect from a Group 1 horse. But in saying that, in March this year, the 26th of March, in the Victoria Handicap, he led for most of that race, but then ended up coming second because he was swamped in the final metres by Black Heart Bart in that race. So he can pull off a good race. That was over, by the way, 1,400 metres. So he can pull off a good race at various times, but he's probably not consistent enough. So yeah, I feel like he's in poor form going into this race. I'm not really giving him much of a chance. He is backed at a generous $23. I probably would have expected him to be a bit higher than that, but $23 is generous from a Charmed Harmony point of view. Not giving him much of a chance. He might be a very, very high chance, unlikely chance of winning. Number 5, we have He or She, backed by the punters at $26. Is coming off a 21-week spell. Had a beautiful run in the Blammy at Flemington early March this year. He came first, did well to come first, and rode a very beautiful race like I mentioned. Its recent run is in the Doncaster, which was against Winks, and Winks won that race, of course. It can win over the 1,400 metres. It can do well over these shorter distances. The only query I probably would say is if it can take it up to the likes of Black Heart Bart, Palantino, Mahuta, and all the favourites, because it's way backed in the odds at $26, but possibly one to look out for. Number 6, we have Tabish, backed by the punters at a whopping $126. And yeah, it hasn't been running over the 1400 metres. This will probably be the first time this year it's going to run over this distance, because it has been running a bit over the longer distances, although its last race was over the 1200 metres at Flemington. That was early August. I feel like this horse is going to find it very hard to get into the top 5 because of not running this distance for quite a while. Number 7, we have Our Fine Eagle, backed by the punters at $14. Had a beautiful trial run a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago, where it came first over the 1400 metres. Its last competitive race over the 1400 metres, it comes second. It hasn't really won a lot of those races over the 1400 metres though in a competitive style. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting horse to watch. I don't think it's capable, to be honest, of taking up to those big horses, but it's definitely one you can't rule out. It is a 48% chance to win and a 78% chance to place, so it could be most likely that it will. Number 8, we have Mahuta, and this horse ran in the Lawrence last week at Caulfield. Wasn't quite electric down the straight as what it has been in some of its runs over the last year or so. It came 6 in the end, just behind Lord of the Sky. Was a bit similar to Lord of the Sky in terms of that it was down the straight in the final metres, but then not the final metres, but heading to the final metres, and then basically got swamped by about 4 other horses. It hasn't got Brad Rawley on board. In fact, it's got John Allen, so this is a new jockey, so that kind of puts things into question a little bit, because Brad Rawley has been on him for the last 5 races he has ran at. So a new jockey, will that help this horse to place or win? I'm not quite sure, but it's been running over this distance, and you'd have to say it's definitely a top 5 chance. Number 9, we have the Victorian Derby winner of 2015, and that is Tarzino. Also won the Rose Hill Guineas over 2,000 metres in the early part of 2016 in March. The only question I pose to this horse, even though it has been in good form leading into this race, the only question I pose is that can it go back to this shorter form distance races. It's coming off a 21-week spell. It did come 4th in its last 1400 metre race, which was back in February, just 2 days after my birthday. It's going to be interesting to see. I'm definitely placing it to finish in that top 6 or 7 place getters. It's just whether it can go back to that shorter distance is the only worry for me. But it's backed at about $13, and it's definitely one to watch in this race. Number 10, we have Tarvago, who is in a similar situation to Tarzino, that it's coming off a 21-week spell. And it's actually going back to the shorter form distance for the first time in a long time. In fact, it was supposed to have a trial run at Cranbourne on Monday, but that did not happen. It's not worrying Mick Price one bit, but it worries me a little bit, because it's had a 21-week spell coming off about 3 races of 2,000 or more distance. Can it go straight back into the 1400 metre distance and do well? I'm not quite sure, to be honest. Considering that it hasn't had a trial run over that distance, I'm not too certain it can. Although over the 1600 metres, it actually came 3rd and 1st in its last 2 races over that distance. However, the one that it came 1st in was last year. So it's an interesting prospect. It's backed by the punters at $10. It's definitely one of the chances, but that's the only criticism for me. It's coming into this race without a trial run and running at a lot larger distances than the 1400 metres. But maybe it won't affect him. We know Mick Price is a very, very high trainer. We'll just have to see how he goes. Number 11, we have Palantino, and in my opinion, this horse is probably the best chance of beating Black Heart Bar in this race. It is in very good form going into this race. It did come 4th in its last race a couple of weeks ago over 1,200 metres. The interesting thing with this horse heading into this race is that In its last, it's got Mark Zahra as the jockey for this race, and in his last 3 races he's rode this horse, he's actually placed in all 3 of them, compared to Brad Ruler, who has come 7th and 4th in his last 2 races on board Palatino. That includes the last run he had. So he seems like a horse that does much better with Mark Zahra on board compared to Ruler, but I think it's going to do well, this horse, backed by the punters at 7.50 cents dollars. It's a good chance in my opinion. Number 12, we have Tally, backed by the punters at $41. Came first in the Autumn Classic at Caulfield in February. That was over the 1800 metres. This is probably going to be the first time for a while that, actually this is the shorter distance for the first time in a while for this horse, and it actually hasn't really won at the 1400 metres. It's won over the 1400 metres, but not at exactly 1400 metres. So it'll be a test for this horse. The odds suggest that he's not much of a chance, this horse. I don't think he is, but surprises can happen. Number 13 is an old favourite in Rising Romance, was in beautiful form in the 2014 racing season, but in my opinion he's not really as good as, she's not really as good I should say, as 2014. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting race. It is coming off a string of races that were ran over the 2000 metre distance. It's in barrier 4. It's backed by the punters at a generous $21. You can't rule it out, but I can't give it much of a chance, I'm afraid. And the final horse of this field is number 14, Sophia Rose, who is in good form leading into this race, has placed in its last 4 races, with 3 of them being won by the horse. But however, they were all ran by a distance of 2,000 or more. So yeah, that suggests that maybe this horse will go into a shorter distance and maybe not do so well. But I actually give this a really good, not a really good chance, but a real good roughy chance, this horse. I think it's spelled for 20 weeks, it's fresh, it might be able to do well over that shorter distance, but then again the question is, can it go from that longer distance to the shorter distance quickly? It's going to be interesting to see. Okay, so time now to have a look at my tips for the Memsie Stakes for 2016. I'm going to start with who I think will win the race, and that is Black Heart Bart. He is in just incredible form, to be honest. He's in sensational form. He's the best placed horse to win this race in my opinion. He's got a good barrier. I think he won't get out early. I think Lord of the Sky, maybe a couple of others will get out before him, but I think coming down the straight, he'll just brush home like we've seen him do in various races over the past year or so and win the race. So Black Heart Bart is who I think is going to win the race. Second is Palatino. I mentioned before this horse is probably the best horse or the best chance to beat Black Heart Bart. I reckon he'll certainly take it up to Black Heart Bart, but I think Black Heart Bart will be just a bit too strong, so I'm putting Palatino in second. Palatino, in my opinion, is in good form and does well with Mark instead of Brad. That's no offence to Brad or anything, but it just seems like Mark is the better jockey for this horse than Brad is. And then third, I've given it to Mahuta. Interesting horse. You know that I questioned it before with the new jockey, but I think you know, Darren Weir trained horse, does well. It wasn't too bad in the Lawrence, and I think it will. I think we'll hold on for third. I think it may be one of those horses that might be going down the straight first, but then get brushed by a couple of horses like the Lawrence, but might be able to hold on to third. So that is in my opinion. Can you believe it? I've just backed 3 horses to place, and they're all Darren Weir horses. That is incredible. And the roughie of the race, my roughie of the race is Lord of the Sky. 5th in the Lawrence, like I mentioned before, was leading for most of the race until basically the last 100 metres. I think it might be the horse that will get out early again. I think it will lead for most of it. Maybe even might even hold on to win. I'm not quite sure, but I like the look of this horse. I really do, and I think it's a good place roughie. If you want to have an each way bet on a roughie that has a bit of a chance, then back this horse, because I think if it doesn't win, it could possibly place. It is not a... The percentages don't show that, but I think with the form, I think it does well over these shorter distances, and I think it's a good roughie to watch in this race. And that is it for the first episode of the big Group 1 racing show. Thank you very much for tuning in, clicking in and watching the first episode of this new racing show. If you liked it, then don't forget to press that thumbs up button. Don't forget to comment your feedback down below and share this video to all your punting friends. Now also don't forget to subscribe, because I'm coming out with a new episode of this every time there is Group 1s to be ran. So the next episode of this will be on Friday the 9th of September 2016. That will be episode 2. And in that episode I will be previewing the Makybe Diva Stakes as well as the Golden Rose Stakes. The Golden Rose Stakes to be ran in New South Wales. So I'll be previewing both of those races, and I'm really looking forward to having a look at those two races. So subscribe to get a new episode of this to your news feed. And well, until next time, I'm Jacob. Enjoy the Memsie Stakes. Hope you win some money. Bye for now.